the world isn't always friendly to people with a criminal background. But if we learn how to think differently and develop the CEO mindset, we can come back to society strong, we can create our own income opportunities, and we can become successful far beyond what anybody else thinks is possible. I'm Michael Santos with Prison Professors, and I want to speak with you today about a strategy I used to find mentors while you are in prison. That is an essential skill set that somebody should develop if they're going in there, or if they're in there, how can you find mentors to help you advance through a very difficult journey? Now, one thing I want to ask you to do before I get started is if you haven't done so already, please subscribe to the Prison Professors program. We really want to get as many people engaged with us as possible. We produce new content every single day to really give a different concept about what does it mean to go into the criminal justice system and come out successfully. It is a fundamentally different message than many of the other prison YouTube channels because we are only focused on how you can get the best possible outcome. And we definitely want to ask you to support our sponsors at cbdtv.com. They're the ones that provide the resources that make it possible for us to produce new content every single day. And the reason that cbdtv.com has gotten involved in this message is because we recognize that people in jails and prisons across America are really going to have the hardest time reacclimating to this changed economy that we have as a result of pandemics and social unrest and high unemployment rates. So we try to provide as many programs as we can to people inside of jails and prisons, but also to people who are going in. We want them to understand best possible outcomes. And one of the best ways to get a best possible outcome is to really develop the CEO mindset, which we speak a lot about at Prison Professors. And the CEO mindset really requires us to define success, what is the best thing that we can accomplish, and then create a documented strategy that we can use to help us get there. We have to document that strategy so that we can get more buy-in. We also have to develop tools, tactics, and resources that will help us execute on the strategy. And then we need some type of a tool that will allow us to measure progress every single day. That is a strategy that really empowered me, and I began serving my sentence way back a long time ago, and everything changed for me when I met my first mentor in prison. His name was Socrates, and I've spoken a little bit about the influence that the story of Socrates had on me when I was in that awkward stage of the time that I was convicted of trafficking in cocaine and facing a sentence of life without the possibility of parole, and the time that I was sentenced. You see, I was incarcerated ever since August the 11th, 1987, and it was a very different era in our society. That was really the ramp up of our nation's commitment to mass incarceration. And so while I was inside of that jail cell, the only thing that I wanted to do in the beginning was to get out of jail. But that, of course, didn't work out so well for me because I ended up going to trial. I perjured myself on the stand during the trial. I just made every bad decision a person could make. And as a result, I was facing a sentence of life without the possibility of parole. And so that's when I started reading about what's the best possible outcome for me. And I would turn to people that I would call mentors. And mentors to me was like I was building this cadre of resources from which I could learn. And I tried to learn from people like Nelson Mandela, an individual who had served at that time about 25 or 26 years in prison when I first started reading about him. I think he ended up getting out of prison in 1988 or 1989, just as I was beginning my journey. He served 27 years, but he did so without any animosity or anger, and he got out with his dignity intact and went on to create enormous contributions to society. And for that reason, he is revered across the globe, or his memory is revered across the globe as an individual that can face intolerable injustices, but still get through there strong and with a very solid mindset. And so I was inspired by him, and that's why I would say that he was one of my mentors. And the takeaway from this is that you don't really have to even meet your mentors. You just have to think. You have to think differently. You have to think in ways that will allow you to learn from people, even though you're only reading about them, because we can learn from people's lives, even though we never meet them. I was incarcerated. I grew up in Seattle, Washington, and I was initially incarcerated inside of the Pierce County Jail in Tacoma, Washington. And at the time that I was coming into the system, Microsoft, the great company, was really just getting off the ground in the mid-1980s. And Bill Gates, of course, is the very well-respected founder of that organization, that company, him and Paul Allen, both of whom are from the Seattle area. And both of them I consider to be mentors to me because they taught me how to think. Right? Bill Gates started Microsoft with this concept, this mindset that today we take for granted. But back in the mid-1980s, it wasn't such a foregone conclusion that every house and every business would have a computer. But that was one of Bill Gates' mindset, is that I want to create a company or a society where every house and every business has a computer. And that really became the pathway of how he defined success. And then he created his documented strategy to get there, and then created tools, tactics, and resources that he measured every day and the market measured every day. And he ended up achieving his goals. So I learned a lot about that CEO mindset from people like Bill Gates. And I also learned from Steve Jobs, his nemesis, who was the founder of Apple Computer, along with his partner, Steve Wozniak. But one of the things that Steve Jobs really said that inspired me and I still learn from is he said that a good artist copies ideas, but a great artist steals ideas. And since I was in jail facing a sentence of life without the possibility of parole, I was in a perfect environment to begin stealing ideas from leaders. And those leaders became my mentors. They inspired me to dig deep and to try and become the best person that I could possibly become, even though I was inside of a jail, even though I was going inside of a prison. And if you are going inside of an environment, look to mentors and role models who can help you. Once I got to the penitentiary, I found another mentor in Malcolm X. Now, why did I look to Malcolm X as a mentor? I still remember it was very early in my sentence, probably 1988. I'd been sentenced to 45 years. And while I was locked inside of a jail cell, I was reading. And one of the books that I liked to read, well, of all the books that I like to read, I really enjoyed reading about people who had gone through struggle, people who had faced difficult circumstances and yet overcame. And Malcolm X, made a lot of bad decisions as a young man, for a lot of reasons. He was born into kind of a Jim Crow era, and he got involved in criminal activity. But while he was in jail, he taught himself to read. He taught himself to become a great communicator. And so I was inspired by him to try to develop my vocabulary, to work to learn how I could convert words into sentences, sentences into paragraphs, paragraphs into pages, and then eventually spin those pages into articles and then essays and then op-ed pieces and then chapters for books and then books. Had I not tried to learn from mentors, I would not have been able to develop that skill set. And that leads me to another mentor that I never met, Gandhi, who suggested that we should all strive to be the change that we want to see in the world. He told us that if we keep everything we think, everything we say, and everything we do in harmony, we will go a lot further toward building a life of happiness and fulfillment and relevance. And that was something that I needed when I was inside of a jail or inside of the prison, just starting a very long prison sentence that would keep me in for multiple decades. I also looked to my parents. They were also mentors of mine. I felt ashamed and humiliated at the bad decisions that I had made during the recklessness of youth. Those decisions put me in the crosshairs of government. And then I made further bad decisions by pushing the government to the test and going through a criminal trial and committing perjury on the stand. But it was after I was convicted that I really had a shift in my mindset and I began thinking about the role models that I wanted to emulate. And both of my parents, I wanted to show them that even though I'd made a lot of bad decisions as a young man, I could do better. I also had two sisters that I loved very much, and yet I caused them a lot of shame and humiliation because it would be difficult for them to encounter others who would be asking about, their criminal brother who was a big drug dealer and serving a 45-year sentence in prison. So I wanted to work hard to try and prove worthy of the love and support that my family members were giving to me. And so I looked to them as also being mentors because I would always think, how are the decisions that I am making today going to influence what I become later? Then went a little bit later in my prison journey, I started to find mentors that I didn't know and that I didn't read about, but people who would come into my life. And I found a lot of those mentors in academia. And one of my first mentors was Dr. R. Bruce McPherson. And if you want to learn how I met Bruce McPherson, I highly recommend that you read my book, Earning Freedom, Conquering a 45-Year Prison Term, because I tell all about it. But here's the short story. Bruce was a professor from the University of Chicago. He lived in Chicago, but he was also a visiting professor at a university in North Carolina. I think it was called the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill. And I met Bruce through another person who was in prison who was also studying, and he told me about that he had a relationship with this professor, and that led me to write an unsolicited letter. It led to a friendship, and Bruce became an instrumental part in my success, which I will speak a little bit about later. He would visit me in prison. He would educate me by sending me books, by sending me postcards of museum, by teaching me about art and music, even though I was locked inside of a high security penitentiary. And then once I started to develop and advance my education and start earning university degrees, I put together this portfolio. And this portfolio really defined who I was as an individual, what I was doing while I was in prison, and what I was aspiring to do in the future. So I created this portfolio that was kind of like the equivalent of a financial statement. Is just I wasn't measuring money. I was measuring all of the work and in the investment that I was making in myself to become a better human being, to become a citizen that was worthy of second chances, that was worthy of new opportunities, even though I had made a series of really bad decisions that resulted in a 45-year prison sentence. And through that work, I ended up meeting another mentor from academia named Professor John DIIULIO, who was a professor at Princeton University. And I reached out to John after I read an article he wrote in the Wall Street Journal. He didn't know who I was. I didn't know who he was, but he was one of the fathers of this movement that led to mass incarceration. And when he published an article with the title, "Let 'Em Rot," in the op-ed pages of the Wall Street Journal, that resulted in me writing him a letter. And by writing him a letter, that led to a correspondence, and that correspondence led to him becoming a mentor to me, where not only did he correspond with me, he even brought a group of students from Princeton University to come and meet me inside of a federal prison so that I could spend a day teaching them my thoughts on what we could do to improve outcomes of the prison system. That also led me to Professor Norval Morris, who in his day was perhaps one of the most esteemed penologists in the United States. He was a professor at Harvard when I think when I first started writing to him, and then he was a professor at the law school at the University of Chicago. And I remember when I first reached out to him and we connected, he told me that he could be a friend to me because he had known all directors of the Bureau of Prisons. And as I needed somebody to advocate on my behalf, he was a great person to assist me. And through George and through Norval and through John DIIULIO, I met my friend George Cole, who was the chair of the Criminal Justice Department at the University of Connecticut. And we developed a friendship. It led to me becoming a published author. He invited me to begin writing chapters for books that he wrote. And eventually he introduced me to his publisher, which opened a slew of opportunities for me. So George used to come and visit me in prison, just like John visited me in prison and Bruce visited me in prison. And all of these mentors really helped me grow. But through all of this effort, I met Carole ZACHARY, who is just an amazing woman. Her and her husband and really their entire family became enormous sources of support for me and mentors for me, and really helped me develop as I moved through the final, 12 years or 15 years of my sentence, where they'd come to visit me several times a year, traveling up from Washington, D.C., assisting me with all types of matters, including finding pro bono counsel that would work to represent me on a number of issues. So I developed this strategy of working to bring mentors into my life, many of whom were educators. Later, mentors came from the publishing arena that helped me build my career. That all of this work really helped me to develop hope and to become more successful, even though I was inside of a prison cell serving a very long sentence. And later I could use all of these relationships, leverage them to begin building a presence on the internet. And I started having a presence on the internet really at the very earliest stages back in the late 1990s, even though I didn't have access to computers directly. I could always use tools. I'm looking around right now for a pen, but things just like a pen and a paper, send them out, and my mentors would help me publish them on the web. And it was through that effort that indirectly I met Carole, who is the love of my life, that I married inside of a federal prison. And together, we really started working to develop my career and to make me feel as if I wasn't just a person serving a 45-year sentence, but I was a human being. I was a man. I had my dignity intact. I was thinking about how I could contribute to the lives of the woman I loved and to the community at large. None of that would have been possible had I not focused on finding good mentors, including journalists who came into my life and helped write about my story, which of course led to me building businesses once I came out and building mentor relationships with several CEOs of billion-dollar organizations and private companies that helped me grow and catapult my career once I got out of prison. So that's really the best possible outcome from our nation's prison system, is to go through it with your dignity intact, land with your feet firmly on the ground and ready to hit the ground, ready to hit business running with a very clear pathway to success. And if you like this type of information, I really encourage you, subscribe to the Prison Professors channel, where we produce content every single day with hopes of teaching and inspiring people who are going through the system and really obliterating the negative consequences and implications of mass incarceration. We try to be the antithesis of the typical YouTube prison channel and strive to show people how they can become successful, even if they're going in to the darkest days of their lives. If they create the right pathway, they can emerge successfully. And again, I want to urge you to support our sponsors. Visit them at cbdtv.com, where they offer every type of CBD product, including gummy bears and balms and tinctures and dog food even. And we'd just love it if you would subscribe to our sponsors, because they make it possible for us to continue spreading this positive message inside of jails and prisons. And that's a place I think that also needs some reform of social justice to try and help people inside there understand the world isn't always friendly to people with a criminal background. But if we learn how to think differently and develop the CEO mindset, we can come back to society strong, we can create our own income opportunities, and we can become successful far beyond what anybody else thinks is possible. I'm Michael Santos with Prison Professors, and I do hope that you will subscribe to our channel, you'll support our sponsors. If you want free information, go up to the banner of our YouTube channel and just download the free brochure, and we'll send you some information that might be of help to you, regardless of what stage in the journey you're in. Thanks so much for being a part of our program.